we're going to talk about taking a hypothesis and how we use the DMP to turn this into tangible and very powerful results. So I'm not going to introduce myself, but Caryn-Amy.
So I'm Caryn-Amy Rose. I started a long time ago as a more development programmer. I was roped into doing technical project management, and turned out I enjoyed it, which I did not expect. I did that for quite some time. Then I moved more into business analysis, and the past few years have gotten a lot more into our data science practice, just as we discovered how critical it was really to determine success. I think for a while it looked like a fancy option, and then it became actually critical to accomplishing our goals.
She's one of the people that actually homegrown data scientist. She didn't say that, but she is. So let's talk about, let's talk a little bit more about who is NEJM.
So NEJM Group is a medical publisher. We publish the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the premier publisher of new medical information. We also publish some clinical newsletters, specialty newsletters, a lot of educational programs. And what I'm going to talk about here is how we ended up really focusing in on using a DMP to accomplish a goal that we really wanted to do, which was to offer a lot more identified specialist audience in our traffic to our advertisers. We do sell advertising, sell targeted advertising, and we're not a bank, so people don't log in so much, but we do have some of that information. So we started out looking at this goal in a really wide way of how we're going to figure out who these people are, and we came to a DMP as part of just figuring out what the solution would be, and we realized that we would get the most value out of a DMP and a look-alike approach.
Well, before we talk about how NEJM used Audience Manager, I'd like to tell stories, as you might notice. We're going to talk about a story related to NEJM and the medical society about someone visiting a doctor, right? So as you go to a doctor, hopefully no one goes to a doctor anytime soon, but you might go. The doctor goes through multiple stages. The first stage is really observing, really taking in what's going on. You're coughing, or maybe you say like, I have stomach ache, but I have a headache, I'm not feeling too well. At that point, you're really just talking, and the doctor is just taking notes. And it's a very important time, because at that point, the doctor wants to know everything. He doesn't know if all these things are related to the problem, or they are completely independent, but it's important for him or her to observe the patient. Once the observation is done, we get into testing. So the doctor now wants to understand, okay, how do I isolate that your stomach ache is actually because you really had bad Taco Bell last night versus having a headache because you have some high blood sugar. So they run some tests. They might run some CT scan or whatever things they do, but the idea is for them to isolate what is relevant versus what is not. Once they run these tests, now comes the fun part about diagnosing. So they look at the test, now they have the initial data, but now they have cleaner data. That is a better indicator to say, okay, I see what's going on. You really have this problem. Based on that, we get into that final stage of treatment. So the doctor now knows, okay, hey, get on antibiotics for 7 days, or you're okay, just go home. That treatment takes place. Key thing happens here is that it doesn't stop here. And a lot of times, the treatment is still kind of a test. If I always think about that old show, House. I used to be a big fan of House, although I know nothing. I'm a doctor, but PhD, I know nothing about medical. But I love that show because if you relate this, it's similar, right? When someone comes in rushing, there's a problem, they diagnose, they identify a problem, they identify the cause, they give him or her a medicine, and then they're like, we solved it, we're good to go, and then all of a sudden the problem is back again, and it's even worse. So the treatment process is actually a cycle. You might get them through a treatment, but that treatment might cause you to see like different results, and that different results you might require to get a different medicine or look at different tests. So it never stops. It's a continuous cycle. Now, from these 4 stages, we're going to tell you how that translates to exactly similar stages in terms of using the DMP with NEJM.
All right, so we have a lot of features. We have had custom analytics in place for a long time, but in 2015 we're actually moving to Adobe Analyst from a different platform. And we have a lot of different features, we have a lot of specialty tags on them, and the thing that we're actually trying to figure out is not what people are doing particularly, and we don't actually have a retail goal here, so we're not looking at conversions. We actually are going to try and figure out a quality audience and be able to tell our advertisers that they are advertising to lookalike specialists. So in the observe portion, we're gathering all this data. We're gathering data about who's clicking what they're clicking, what specialty the thing they're clicking is in, just so much information. And we're able to plan our Adobe Analytics in conjunction with our Audience Manager Tree taxonomy so that we are prepared to pull it all together. And it's fantastic. We flip all the switches, and it's a party, data party. Jerry has t-shirts.
Something I want to point out that is relevant to this is that this was 3 or some years ago. We were in the middle of the implementation, and not only DTM was new, still kind of Adobe, but middle of the implementation, server-side forwarding became available. And I remember I ran to Caryn-Amy and I said, hey, there's this really cool feature. It will take away Audience Manager of your site. You can just flip a switch and then we'll send all the analytics data. You want to try it? And this is like a month away from going live. Anyone that is sane would say, no, we'll wait for this later. She was like, yes, let's do this. And actually, they were one of the first people that used server-side. And till today, you guys are still using it.
It's fantastic. This
awesome.
Is a great proof of my motto, which is there's only one way to find out.
So, Caryn-Amy, there's a lot of data. You're observing a lot of data, but you walked into the DMP expecting that, oh, this data, we're going to be able to create that specialty, but instead you ran into a problem.
Super exciting problem. There's an amazing amount of data. There's so much information. But we had not completely anticipated the complexity of what was going to happen. So first of all, these are specialists. So I'm a cardiologist, right? I'm going to read articles. I'm going to have a multidisciplinary approach. I'm going to read articles that are about emergency medicine, that are about geriatric care. So the users are going to read a lot of specialties, and they're very quickly going to have pretty much all the specialty traits across whatever interactions they're doing, right? On top of that, the content itself is multidisciplinary. So they could look at one article and get 4 different specialty traits. So we have an amazing amount of data, and it's coming through at all levels, like whether you look at a granular user level or kind of the whole thing, with just very noisy. Very exciting, but super noisy. So how do we wrangle it all together and accumulate the right information so that we can then unwrangle it in a different structure that actually tells us the information we need to know?
So you went through some testing, which is very interesting.
Yes. So this was really fun. So we were really excited to try the lookalike models. There was a betting pool as to whether we'd be able to just run with them and there would be no more work to do after we set up the models. I don't remember which side I bet on, which is probably not a good sign as to whether I was correct or not. I probably remember being right. But so we turned on the models, and they are, oh my god, I took a screenshot yesterday, and I didn't even notice this was here.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
This is amazing. So we didn't have this at that time. So we turned on the model, and they were super useful. So we started looking at them over time. We were actually downloading them every week or so, and then we were looking at what are the influential traits at the top, and not only what are the influential traits, but what is a stable influential trait over time. Because a new feature could come out, a particular news thing could happen, and something could pop to the top, but it doesn't stay there. And we really also wanted to implement a program that that would be stable over time, so we were very interested in kind of seeing how this went. So the problems here, though, that our initial tests started coming back was that the qualifying influential traits were very low volume, and then the common traits were so huge that they weren't really useful. So we began to realize that we were going to need to do more work. And one thing that the model helped with, though, was realizations that we didn't check for. So we had some hypotheses as to what we thought would be meaningful. And the really cool thing about the models was some of those proved out, and some of them were disproved. Like the first day after, we set up a model, we looked the next day, and we're like, okay, that was totally wrong. We thought physicians would only take quizzes in their specialty. Totally wrong. They take whatever quiz is new at the end of the month when they have their deadline. So that kind of thing, I really love it when data tells you something you didn't kind of already know and anticipate. But this did tell us we're going to need to do a lot more tests and figure out what to do next. So the models did help in showing those influential traits, but we realized we're going to have to take some of those influential traits that looked promising based on the models and layer in new dimensions. So of those traits that look promising in terms of giving a qualified audience that they can have a pretty good confidence level that they're the specialist you're looking for, what's the frequency and what's the time frame? Like, is it 2 articles out of 3 in 5 days, or like what are those different combinations that are going to give us the highest quality, confidence in the quality? And of course, same question, once we start looking at those new dimensions, how do those track over time? What's going to be stable over time?
Yeah, and I want to point out, this is a 2-step process, right? The models were created first, and the idea was to create the influential traits, and at that point, we thought that's it. We knew the influential traits were good to go, but it was not enough. So layering these 3 dimensions, with time, frequency, as well as the volume is very important. We're looking for unique specialty audience. We're not running this as a media where we just want to get big volume, but we want to make sure it's the right specialty. So that was a crucial part in the analysis that Caryn and Amy have done. Oh, and then this.
So diagnosis. So one of the things that we did is pull together those dimensions. I talked about that. So for example, this is all about people who looked at a specialty hub, which is just like a kind of portal. Particular specialty hub, how many times they look at it, what was their time frame. But for each of those traits that we thought was going to be meaningful, we actually wanted to figure out how could we actually have a benchmark about our confidence level in this. So for each of those behaviors, we actually made 3 segments, and we called it the 3-segment test. We made a segment that's just the behavior, so anybody that does that behavior. We then made another segment that's any registered user doing that behavior. And we made a 3rd segment that's registered specialists in the target specialty who's doing that behavior. And we took a ratio of the specialists in the registered known user sphere, and that ratio is what we kind of use as our benchmark to look at everyone doing the behavior and sort of say, okay, based on that ratio, we can kind of figure that this is our confidence level in the anonymous group of lookalikes. So that enabled us to start sort of diagnosing or identifying which segments we might really move forward with targeting.
Yep. Not an easy process, by the way. Just if this does not make it really complex. All right, so now we moved into the treatment. We observed, we tested, we diagnosed. Now we have our audiences. It's time to really take action. So this is where we connected Audience Manager with an ad server. It's called Ad Tech, that was pushing the data into the ad server. The ad server was taking this information, and it had its own algorithm and other data points that identified what is the best audience or the best experience this audience should get. And here is just an indicator showing some of the ads that are on NEJM website when you go there. And these are, the way they are rendered are not by chance. They are relying on the audiences that are coming from Audience Manager. Now, we thought that this is done, right? In normal world, the treatment, it's the sales team is happy. They're selling these ads. As a publisher, my inventory is 100% sold, doing great. But that did not stop Caryn-Amy. There was more to think about.
So I don't know if New England Journal of Medicine is familiar to people, but we've been around since 1812. We have like really high brand knowledge, and theoretically we could sort of rest on those laurels. But what it actually drives is a real drive to always be confirming that we're delivering what we're promising, right? So ongoing monitoring, and so there was a real evolution in kind of how we evaluated going forward. We actually went live with this targeting program months before our announced go live date, so that we could make sure it was actually delivering before we even told anyone that they could purchase it. And then how are we going to monitor how it went? So the new component that we started incorporating was the audience manager. At first I started with just segment size against impressions we were getting. So I was comparing daily segment sizes and kind of like using the real-time segment sizes as a proxy and comparing it to how many impressions am I getting per segment size. And I realized, well, that's actually silly. I'm going to actually use the qualified traffic on the site. So I started running that report from Analytics and comparing that to the ad impressions. And I did so many Google Sheets and Excel formats and all kinds of things over time. And finally, we realized that the smartest thing to do would be to put it in R to aggregate the data. And once we sort of aggregated it and wrangled it, then we could ask any questions that we wanted. So that was really fun. So what this chart is actually just hematology oncology. It's just the cancer specialty. And it's a month where 5 campaigns were running. So they sold the max number of campaigns in that specialty that they're ever going to sell. And we have, some of the reason I mentioned that we were looking at volatility is we still publish once a week. We don't publish in every specialty every week. A lot of our visitors only come to the site twice a month. So we do have, and we have like a weekly cycle, so we actually do have days when the traffic and impressions are very low and days when traffic and impressions are very high, and we would expect that. So it means we can make kind of a nice line graph and explain to the ad sell team or anyone who's interested how many impressions are we getting per user in that segment, kind of what's the value of these users. We can monitor and make sure that our segments aren't inflated. There's a total universe of like each of these specialties. If there's only 15,000 nephrologists in the United States, a segment of 60,000 is not a win, so you don't want to be inflated either. So this is a nice visual, but there's a lot of other questions that we ask in terms of just performance and quality of the data, so that we're constantly reconfirming.
Okay, and then part of the results and the win was, and she alluded to this a little bit, is forecasting. So getting that data, understanding the audiences, the impressions that they're seeing, combining the data from Audience Manager and the ad server really helped in forecasting so that the sales team can be confident and say, next year we're gonna up our forecasting because we know that this data can back it up. The other one was cross-business impact. This came out of pretty much nowhere. Can you tell us a story about that?
Yeah, this was cool. So we were just kind of going around. We did a little lunch and learn about the project that we had done, and we sort of let people know that these, we happen to do the integration with a cookie destination. So we let people know that this cookie is now available on the site, identifying these lookalikes. And really quickly, this other line of business, which is NEJM Career Center, which provides job listings for physicians, of course, they got really excited. They have this widget on every page of NEJM.org, and they are now able to use our cookie to make sure that the listings are targeting the lookalike specialty if it's there.
All right, so just a quick summary, right? Just pointing out these 4 stages. Just talked about them: observing, testing, diagnosing, and treating and continuing. A couple of things to point out. I don't know how much you guys spend time with DMP today, but in Audience Manager today, in NEJM instance, there's 14,000 traits. That's a good number. Usually, I think, 10,000 is like, don't go over it. So they're not too much over, but they do have 32,000 segments. That is a lot. But because it's managed properly, because there's the right taxonomy and governance behind it, you actually know where everything is. Impressive. In terms of models, there's 20 models, but at one point, this is a fun fact, early on, before Adobe set limits on how many models each client can run, she ran in one day 60 of them, which I got a call from engineering telling me to tell her to stop. So we're definitely pushing the envelope. One more thing just to point out here is that this process takes time. This is a question a lot of clients will ask, and NEJM asked early on, is how long would it take for us to start seeing the value?
It says 0 months. That's instant gratification.
Yeah.
Here, I'll just stand here.
Good night. So this took around 9 months. The majority of the work was in the diagnosis and the treatment. We needed to have enough time to collect data before we were able to do the right diagnosis and the right treatment.
So that has really paid off incredibly well. This went live officially January 1st, 2016. It's been completely stable ever since. Every month, the behavioral targeting impressions have been way over their goals. It's the best performing area of the online advertising right now. We've got a lot of verbal positive feedback from the advertising clients, so they're really happy with it. It's incredibly stable. I actually only even touch the system if we change our targets using forecasting, if I'm able to tell them we can raise the targets of impressions. If there's a website change and I just need to update accordingly, or if I'm adding new specialties, which we did a couple times. So this was like set it and forget it for 3 years, and there's sometimes like a whole quarter will go by where I barely touch it. I maybe run an analysis once just to make sure everything's set, everything's good. So.
But that's about to change. So initially, when this started, this was only a desktop experience. Now that the ad sales wants to get this more into mobile, we are going to start looking more into profile merge. The idea, same what Nick was talking about, is stitching the products and devices and be able to understand what not only time and frequency and the models and all these variations, we're going to add a new dimension that is number of devices. So those 32,000 segments, there might be 64,000 by the end of 2019. The other thing that we are very excited about, and this is something that was announced at Summit, and I know it's on your roadmap, is the data science workspace. One of the things that you've probably noticed of this is that there's a lot of R data science that we're hoping that this becomes part of this new tools that Audience Manager is rolling out. And then I just took the screenshot of the Data Explorer. I think that is, she got so excited about it. So this is really very fresh that we put it in here. But that is very cool because we're only analyzing the data that we pointed out, right? There is so much other data points that we're missing. So this is gonna give you plenty of room to play with more data and understand how you can turn that into audiences that you didn't have access to before. Yep. Thank you guys. Any questions?